Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Kris. I did a video, I think I just released it. It was Lincoln and Grant's final meeting, and there was another one, that's Grant and Lee's final meeting after the Surrender Appomattox 160. So before we get started, this is another American Battlefield Trust. Love the site. Love the channel. Sorry, not a site. But if you can click that thumbs up for me, bare minimum, please. Click on the subscribe button if you like the content. Click on the thanks button if you want to donate to the channel. Keep the channel rolling, sponsor a video, whatever. Much appreciated. Understand if you don't. Hey, teach their own. Okay, let's get into this one.
Hey everybody, Gary Edelman, American Battlefield Trust. We're at Appomattox Courthouse. We're on the Richmond-Lynchburg Stage Road. That's Kris White behind the camera. Here we have Patrick Schroeder, our good and old friend, helping us with preservation and a variety of historical matters. He's the historian here at the Appomattox Courthouse National Historic Park. Now, Patrick, we're going to get right into it here. Hopefully you've already watched some of our videos taking us from City Point through the Petersburg operations and Sailors Creek and the surrender. And after the surrender, make sure you watch that video, Grant...
No, I haven't seen any of those. I really want to, but I kind of want to do a video on them. They've got one like 5 parts on Gettysburg. Has nothing to do with this video. Back to the video.
Grant and Lee went back to their respective armies, and it's a day after the surrender. What next?
Well, Lee wants something written to his army. He tasked Charles Marshall with doing that. Marshall got tied up doing other things, and on the 10th, Lee asked for doing that. Marshall got tied up doing other things, and on the 10th, Charles Marshall...
Sorry. I'm trying to move out of the way. Appomattox Courthouse Visitor Center. The McLean House. I thought they met at the McLean House. Lafayette Meek's grave. I don't know who that is. Appomattox Courthouse National Isbell House. I don't know. Appomattox Battlefield. I don't know. Kelly Robinson, Pierce home. Chamberlain, Gordon's salute site. Don't know what that is. Grant and Lee's final. Okay, that would make sense. So, I thought they met at McLean's house. It was Appomattox Courthouse, but I thought that was McLean. Anyways, we'll find out, won't we?
Marshall was doing that. Marshall got tied up doing other things, and on the 10th, Lee asked for that letter to his army, and Marshall hadn't done it. Lee tells him to get in an ambulance and do it, and that he writes what becomes known as General Order Number 9, Lee's farewell address.
Lee's farewell.
That will be treasured by the Confederate soldiers that leave here from Appomattox. So some of them even make copies of it and take it to General Lee for him to sign. So
we know there's a printing press in town.
Yeah, but they hand wrote these and took them to Lee to sign. Some of them did. But the where we're standing now, just off to our right, is where Lee and Grant met on horseback on April 10th. Most people don't know about this meeting, that Grant actually comes down and initiates this meeting. He gets stopped at the Confederate picket line. They send for Lee. Grant had said he had a mind to see Lee one more time before he left. And Lee rides here. They meet on this knoll, and Grant asked Lee to surrender all Confederate armies in the field, because over at the McLean House, he had only surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia. You still got Joe Johnston in North Carolina. You got Richard Taylor in Alabama. You got Kirby Smith out in Texas. So Grant wants all those armies surrendered, but Lee declines.
Okay, they did meet at the McLean House. Lee declines because he's not in charge. That was, what's your name? What's your name, sir? Jefferson Davis. Sorry, I had to look at the book. Jesus, I could have looked up on that second shelf. Jefferson Davis was in charge, and he couldn't make them surrender. Now, if Lee said, "Hey, fellas, war's over," I think that would have went a long way to getting them to give up. But Davis, why am I forgetting his name? Davis wanted everyone to pull back and fight guerrilla warfare, which I think they held out through April, May, maybe June, but I think it was May.
He says he's not in communication with Jefferson Davis. It would be Jefferson Davis's privilege.
Yeah.
But Lee thought the war was nearly over. At least he hoped so. But Lee used that occasion to ask Grant since the war was still going on, to have his men issued parole passes to get them home safely. So that's where the idea of the parole passes come up. And John Gibbon, who's nearby, Corps commander, says he has a portable printing press in his wagons, and that's what they use to print up the parole passes.
So they take his printing press and set it up where?
At the Clover Hill Tavern.
At the Clover Hill Tavern. And I think a lot of people just think that, they surrendered, and then the army, the soldiers just drop their guns if you're a Confederate, and you go home. There's a whole lot more to it. There's paroles, there's a ceremony. Could you hook us up with that?
Well, sure. In fact, there is so much going on that Grant and Lee appoint commissioners to work out the details of how the surrender will take place. Grant appoints Wesley Merritt, Charles Griffin, and John Gibbon. Lee appoints William Nelson Pendleton, John Gordon, and James Longstreet. And they actually go to the Clover Hill Tavern first, and they say it's a bare, cheerless place. So they go to Gibbon's headquarters at the McLean House, and they set down to paper how the surrender will take place. And one of the provisions in that document, the commissioner's document, is there will be a ceremonial turning over of arms. And that process is going to take 3 days. And they actually have the Confederate cavalry, which is only about 1,600 Confederate cavalry left here, because some of them, 2,400, broke out on the 9th. Those 1,600 cavalry will surrender on April 10th. Pretty small ceremony. They wanted to get the horses away from here because there was no food for the horses. So they wanted to get the horses away. The next day, the Confederate artillery surrenders on April 11th. And they just pull their caissons and guns along the stage road here down to it's on the opposite side of the river, and they just leave their cannons along the road. They send Turner's division of the 24th Corps down here to receive those cannon. Lee started the campaign with 250 cannon. That's a lot of guns. By the time he reaches here, after the Battle of Appomattox Station, he's got 65 guns left. So he has lost 4/5 of his artillery by the time he surrenders. The largest part of Lee's army, though, is infantry, about close to 23,000 infantrymen here. And they are going to surrender on April 12th. Joshua Chamberlain, who is with the 1st Division of the 5th Corps, is put in charge of this ceremony. He gets his men, the 3 brigades of his division, to line this road, and they are going to receive the Confederate arms and the turning over of colors. And I think Chamberlain was pretty excited. He had dinner with the county clerk the day before, and he has his men lining this road at about 5 o'clock in the morning. Of course, the Confederates don't want to do this. They find this rather humiliating, and they finally come up somewhere between 8 and 9 o'clock that morning. And they're going to come up a division at a time. There's 10 divisions of Confederate infantry. By that time, Chamberlain's men are standing along the road, probably at in-place rest. But as the Confederates approach, Chamberlain calls them to attention, and then orders them to shoulder arms, where they pick their muskets off the ground and bring it up to this position here. It's what's called a marching salute. That's what you would normally do if you were at in-place rest and the colors were passing by. You'd go to shoulder arms. So Chamberlain calls his men to shoulder arms. Confederates are marching up at the route step like I said, they didn't want to do this. Their heads are down, their arms are at will. They hear Chamberlain's men shouldering arms. Gordon turns to his men and calls them to shoulder arms. So they return that salute by shouldering arms. Like I said, they come up a division at a time. They face front. They turn over their arms, equipment, and flags. And the flags, you know, that just meant everything to the men. They've been carrying them for 4 years. So it's a very emotional and touching ceremony. Confederates would then countermarch, go back into the Appomattox River Valley. The Federals would clear off the road. The next division would come up. So the process was repeated throughout the morning and into the afternoon.
So I want to back up to a couple things
Sure.
you said there, Patrick, because I thought that was great. Very succinct and got right through the story. Number one, I think it's interesting that Grant chooses an officer from each one of the armies to represent kind of that commission. So you'd have an army of the Shenandoah, you'd have the army of the James, and then you have the army of the Potomac.
Right.
Lee, you know, basically has a conglomeration of what was left over in the Richmond defenses, and he still has his army in Northern Virginia all here together. So I always thought that was interesting. Another interesting fact that I think that people don't know, James Longstreet was worried about after the surrender, you know, maybe some hotheads getting some ideas. He had his men line up their arms before they come here for the official surrender and had his men camp across the street from them. Is that one of those myths of Appomattox? But this is what Longstreet claims in the later years.
Yeah, I'm not sure, you know, if he thought that they would go to fighting or something like that prior to the surrender, but I mean, no mistake about it. The Federals were prepared during this ceremony. They were loaded. In case something did transpire, they were ready. So yeah, not surprising that I can't confirm or deny that that's what happened with Longstreet's men. But they were prepared. I mean, they were still soldiers and they were military men, and they took precautions just as we would today take precautions from having anything transpire. But there's very few, if any, incidents of actual, you know, killing and casualties after the surrender takes place. When the white flags are out, there are casualties during the truce flag period, because Martin Gary from South Carolina disavows the truce flags and says South Carolinians never surrender. And he ordered the 7th South Carolina to make a charge on Custer's advanced regiments, the 8th and 15th New York Cavalry, who have Spencer repeating carbines. So when the 7th South Carolina Cavalry come charging down the LeGrand Road, they're going to run into guys with 7-shooters. Of course, they squeeze off a few rounds and empty 10 or 12 saddles from the 7th South Carolina. So I bet you those guys wish they had surrendered.
Yeah, tensions are high.
So yeah, and a federal private named Benjamin Weir, he rides into the Confederate lines. Talcott's engineers, Confederate engineers, he apparently makes a little speech and then tries to grab their flag, and they're not going to allow that to happen, and they riddle him full of bullets. So there are casualties while those white flags are out. But after the surrender takes place, I don't know of any incidents like that.
So let's talk just for a minute or so about this whole, you know, pageantry. Now, number one, we talked about the cav surrendering. We talked about the artillery and the infantry. Now, this only applies to men within a 20-mile radius. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is one of the agreements that the commissioners set in writing, was that the surrender included anybody within 20 miles of Appomattox Courthouse.
So Lee's army, if you're on that radius, you're basically, you know, you're surrendered.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I mean, you know, of course, we have Joe Johnston still down in the Carolinas. We have Mobile, which is going to surrender the same day the passing of the armies will take place here with the infantry on April 12th of 1865. We have other surrenders that will happen. So I think that's interesting.
Sure. Yeah, once Joe Johnston receives news of Lee's surrender, he suspends hostilities, but it is a few days, a week or so, that it takes him to work out the terms with Sherman. So Joe Johnston surrenders to Sherman on April 26th at the Bennett Place near Durham, North Carolina. Then there's Richard Taylor, who surrenders his troops down in Alabama on May 4th. And then the last Confederate general to surrender is Kirby Smith out in Texas. Of course, there is the CSS Shenandoah that is sinking whaling vessels off the Bering Strait. When they get the news, they think they're going to be held as, or probably prosecuted as pirates. and subject to death. So they circumnavigate the globe and end up landing there at Liverpool, England on November 5th, 1865, and turning over their ship there to the British. So that's really the last Confederate force with arms that surrenders.
So we talked about the paroles here, and the two things I want to close with. Number one, the paroles. We talked about this in our last video. Check that out if you haven't yet. So that parole pass is very important. So we talked about the printing press. So we're printing off these things throughout the evening, trying to get as many of them out there. What does this parole mean to the Confederate soldier? It's not just saying I'm out of the war, but it's actually an important document.
Sure. Well, first of all, they want to keep it because they show that it's proof they made it to the end here at Appomattox with General Lee. But secondly, it protects them on the way home from being taken up as a prisoner, sent off to a Union prison camp, and so they can get through Confederate armies further south and not put back into the ranks or subject to execution as a deserter. They were allowed to use them for transportation on ships and railways. They could draw rations with them. We've even got paroles that show them being issued shoes and clothing. So very important document to have with them, and very generous for Grant to allow them to do that. In fact, some of the Confederate soldiers, you would think they'd be anxious to get home, but they use that parole pass to travel and do a little sightseeing. So one soldier with the Washington Artillery of New Orleans went from here. He wanted to go see the Federal trenches at Petersburg, the fortifications, things that he had looked at for 9.5 months, wanted to see the other side of them. He goes to City Point, takes a steamer up to Washington. He tours around Washington, goes up to Baltimore, gets on the Baltimore-Ohio Railroad, goes out to St. Louis, where he gets on the Mississippi, a boat on the Mississippi, and goes home. So he wasn't in any hurry to get home. He did a lot of sightseeing on that parole pass.
I think that guy was almost like from the time he was issued that to the time he was home. I want to say it was like 8 months to a year. I mean, he wasn't required to immediately go home. He had a parole pass. So it was like, well, I might as well just see this thing and just be, I'm alive, and I might as well just kind of go on a historical tour, and that's what he did. He returned home. I think it was like 8 months to a year later.
All on the government's dime.
Because I know it's important, because I read in Longstreet's Corps, they came across $300 in greenbacks, and Longstreet had that broken up between like the Texas Brigade and the guys from Arkansas, because he wanted to make sure they had the money because they had the farthest to go. Tom Goree, who's on his staff, decided to go through New York and then New Orleans and then finally back to Texas. So it's interesting how some of these guys want to get home right away and others are sightseers.
Yeah, it is. And I'd say the public misconception is that these poor guys had to walk home.
Yeah.
Well, if you're from Virginia, North Carolina, or Tennessee, yeah, you're probably going to walk home. You're a soldier. You used to march, and I mean, heck, you marched here in a week from Petersburg. So they're used to marching. But troops there from Louisiana, Alabama, Texas, they march east and go to City Point. Same for troops from Florida, and they get steamers at City Point. And City Point was the busiest port in the world at the time.
Yeah.
So they would get transportation, courtesy of their parole pass, to take a ship to get them close to home. So,
and they're not paying for that. That's
right.
coming right out of the government funds.
Yeah.
And finally, let's talk, before we wrap up, about John Brown Gordon and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. So this scene that took place out here on April 12th of 1865, is this one of those myths of the Civil War? Is this one of those first steps towards reconciliation? Because, I mean, you have two guys, John Brown Gordon and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, that don't let history get in the way of a good story sometimes. So I'm curious your take on it.
Chamberlain wrote Passing of the Armies, and it's kind of in a high Victorian prose. But basically what he puts in the Passing of the Armies is in a letter he wrote on April 13th, 1865 to his sister. The thing is, what transpired out here did happen as I told it. I think it grew in people's minds over the years, the importance to it, and the recollection of it. But undoubtedly did happen. As it was written about. I know some people Think it didn't, but there's plenty of evidence to show that Chamberlain was in charge. The salute happened in period newspapers and documents and orders.
So it happened, because we're going to have another myths video for you at another point. Because I think it's important to realize that during this campaign, Sailors Creek, other places, Union soldiers, after these Confederates are surrendering, they're getting them food, they're making sure that they're taken care of. There is an animosity with some of the soldiers, but many of them can see the end here.
Yeah.
And now we start to see the country come back together here. At least it's baby steps here at Appomattox.
Sure. Like I said earlier, I think there's kind of an air of good feeling created here with the generous terms, the salute, the rations, and all that. And they are mingling. Now, not every Confederate is mingling. Some of them are very bitter. But probably the majority of them start to see things a little differently. Maybe things won't be so bad. And there is that intermingling of the armies. The problem is April 14th, when Lincoln's assassinated. After that, the Federal soldiers want nothing to do with the Confederates after Lincoln's assassinated. One Union soldier wrote that it was a good thing the Confederates surrendered before Lincoln was assassinated, because if they surrendered afterwards, he said there would have been no surrender, only blood. So it's unfortunate Lincoln's killed, but fortunately the surrender had already taken place.
Yeah, because it definitely takes it a whole different direction after he dies on April 15th.
Yeah, and even Union troops leaving here talk about Confederates intermingled with them as they march away from here. And generals riding with Federal generals away from here. So
I think some of the most fascinating stories are the generals getting back together like they had just come back from West Point or Mexico or other places.
Oh, yeah.
These guys are all, friends before the war. Now it's like they hadn't missed a beat, even though they were trying to kill each other for 4 years.
Yeah, they met in front of the courthouse while waiting for the Lee Grant meeting.
Yeah.
They call it the Brandy Conference, and they all got together and talked about old times at West Point or wherever they had associations. John Gibbon tells some jokes of how General Heath was wearing his undergarments, just overcoat and undergarments, and he was friends with General Wilcox, and Wilcox showed Gibbon Gibbon showed Wilcox a picture of his wife and daughter and all that, and gave it to Wilcox. And so there was that. Longstreet comes over and seeks out Grant.
Yeah.
Meade comes through the lines and seeks out Lee. That's a kind of a funny story that Lee says to Meade, what's all that gray doing in your beard? And Meade says, you have to account for most of it.
I love the stories that come out, because James Longstreet during this campaign at one point thought he saw John Gibbon and tipped his hat to him on the battlefield. He said, but he was probably a little busy and didn't notice me. And then at another point, he spends an hour with Grant just catching up. Everyone seemed to know Cadmus Wilcox. Everybody loved him. He was in everybody's wedding since before the war.
That's right. He was in Grant's wedding and probably was Grant's best man rather than Longstreet. And Wilcox seemed to be the most popular of all of them, that's for sure.
Uncle Billy Fixin. So with that, we want to thank everybody for watching this series. Go and check out our other series.
It's there's something about when you view them during the war, the leaders, and then when you see them intermingle, it's kind of like, oh yeah, they are people with shared history and friendship and love and devotion for one another. At the same time, it took this to split them. But when things came back together, it was like, hey, these 4 years, so what else have you been up to? And they just kind of, everyone falls back into line of moving forward. And I want, as they said, had Lincoln been assassinated before, I think I don't know if Lee is willing to talk to Grant for fear that Grant is going to kill him and all his men. Grant would not have. Sherman would not have. Sherman might have wanted to, but he respected Johnston. And because he respected Johnston, he would not have allowed his men to do that. But yeah, there probably would have been some killings of soldiers who had nothing to do with the death of Lincoln. Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed. We're going to end it here. I'll cover some more of these, some of these videos, because I enjoy them. So, hope you enjoyed. Until next time, have a good day, have a good night.